Hello. Thank you for joining us this morning for another of the Columbus Foundation's nonprofit forums. My name is Danielle Tong, and I'm going to be your host today. Today, we're talking about Equitable Employee Handbooks, and you'll hear 45 tips in 45 minutes. I'm delighted to introduce to you Jody Segal today. Jody comes to us as an experienced nonprofit leader and fundraising professional. Having touched every piece of the nonprofit operation, she brings to us a background in HR, finance, administration, and more. Previously, Jody was the Deputy Director for the Ohio Environmental Council, where under her leadership, the organization grew from a $1 million operation to a $6 million operation with multiple sites. Today, Jody will be sharing with us multiple tips on how to make your handbook the most equitable it can be. Really excited to hear more about that. Before we get started today, we have a few housekeeping tips that I want to share with you. The first is closed captioning. If you look at the bottom right-hand portion of the screen, you'll see a live transcription button. If you click that button, it'll say show or hide subtitles. You can also change the size of the subtitles within that box. And you can also move the subtitles around the screen to suit you. If it's covering something on the screen that you need to see, you can just click and drag it to wherever suits you better. Also, just so you know, this session is being recorded. Because it is a webinar format, our participants today in the audience will not be seen in the recording, but it is recording the panelists. That means that this webinar will be accessible to you after the event is over. And if you've registered via Eventbrite, you will receive an email afterwards that contains a link to how you can access this recording, along with other resources that are graciously provided by our presenter today, and also a survey there that I hope you take a few minutes to let us know how we're doing with our nonprofit forum series. The final thing I want to talk a bit about is the Q&A box versus the chat box. It already looks like folks are chatting in the chat box, which we always love to see. We also want to use that box for technical questions and concerns about the webinar. So if you have a difficult time accessing the closed captioning, or you're having a hard time seeing slides, we have that box monitored for technical assistance. If you have content-related questions that you'd like to ask Jody, please put those in the Q&A box and continue to monitor the Q&A box throughout the forum. If you see questions that somebody else has asked that you want to hear, please do upvote those questions. That'll help me know during the Q&A section that those are important questions that multiple audience members would like to hear the answer to. If you don't see a question there that you would like to have asked, please feel free to type that question in the Q&A box. During the Q&A section, I will be asking questions from that box to Jody, and it will help us understand more about her topic. So I think that's all for housekeeping. And with that, I'd love to pass the mic to Jody Segal. Thank you, Jody.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here with everybody. So Big Change Consulting helps mission-based organizations start up, gear up, and clean up their operations, HR, and fundraising. And our goal is to help organizations more effectively run the business side of their nonprofit so that they can focus on their mission instead of putting out fires and spinning their wheels. This means helping on projects, intense support for a short period, or staying in your corner on an ongoing basis. Our clients include environmentalists, storytellers, wellness coaches, human rights supporters, activist organizations, and nonprofit service providers. Prior to founding Big Change Consulting, as Danielle said, I was Deputy Director at the Ohio Environmental Council, which is a longtime grant recipient of the Columbus Foundation. So I have deep appreciation for what they do and each of you. So I'm very excited to be here with you today. Last summer, the killing of George Floyd was a catalyst for community members and organizational leaders to examine their role within social systems and to strive for more equity. Nonprofits, businesses, and government agencies are thinking more deeply about these issues and their approach and seeking tools to help. The field of HR is key to address how employers and employees work together. However, HR is lagging behind the leading edge. And so there aren't a lot of tools and people to support you as you work to improve your employee practices and operations. And that's why I designed this training to support the work that DEI leaders, diversity, equity, and inclusion leaders, nonprofit leaders, and staff are doing to further equity. So thanks for devoting the next hour to helping make your organization more equitable. Our goals for today are for you to gain practical tips for your organization to address issues you've been thinking about, develop ideas of new things to address, grow in your frame of reference for equitable staff policies, and reaffirm or deepen your commitment to working for culture change within your organization and to more equitably fulfill your mission. We're going to review 2 themes that run through Employee Handbooks, go through our 45 tips, and some of that content will be familiar to you and some of it will be new as your organizations are going to range in size, budget, staffing, and evolution in your equity work. And then finally, the Q&A. So there are 2 major themes within these 45 tips. Understanding these themes will help you craft policies and procedures that aren't addressed in this specific list. What we will discuss today is by no means exhaustive. They are, first, support a diversity of perspectives. If you want things done the same way as the past, then by all means, let's keep doing it the same way. But if you're looking for growth and change, then you must adopt a growth mindset. A growth mindset is one where you look at challenges as opportunities. You seek feedback because you want to learn and take perspectives into account. If your systems and your approaches are set up to check boxes, get things done, make people merely think they have been included, or if you get defensive when someone suggests a change, then you do not have a growth mindset and your policies will not support diversity, equity, and inclusion the way that you want. Your organization should reward the sharing of opinions, creativity, rethinking how things have been done, getting input, and trying new things. Of course, this operates within reality. For nonprofits, that includes time constraints, budget constraints, and mission priorities. Number 2 is protect personal time and finances. It's an understatement to say that nonprofits are tight on money. We have to be smart stewards of our funding. We also need to avoid being penny wise and pound foolish. One important way this plays out is asking staff to subsidize their employment. Staff should be compensated fairly for physical resources they bring to work and time they spend. Individuals with fewer resources are overly burdened by having to pay organizational expenses as part of their jobs. Now we'll get into the tips by topic area. You're welcome to take notes, but these slides will also be available and there will be an assessment tool available at the end of the presentation. Your mission statement describes your purpose. Your vision statement is what you would like to look like after your mission is complete. And the values describe your ethical priorities to fulfill your mission. Involving staff and board in this work is fundamental to ensuring that the organization is pointed in the right direction. Most groups have a mission and a vision statement, but some of them could use an update. Even if they don't need an update, it's useful to engage your team around these fundamentals, which could help each of you gain perspective as you move forward together. You can ask your staff and board, what does the mission statement mean to you? Does the mission statement need an update? What is your vision for the organization? Establishing organizational values is a relatively new practice. This is a great opportunity to involve your team in establishing priorities of how you will work together within the community. Examples of values for your organization may include transparency, equity, empathy, and integrity. And once these are all in good shape, then actually use them. Don't just put them on a shelf. This is not an exercise for the sake of feeling good. These are rules of engagement. Refer to them when making challenging decisions. Refer to them when hiring and doing staff evaluations, and call out examples of staff embodying organizational values. There are a lot of acronyms in the field of equity using different combinations of these letters. Essentially, you want to define these terms within your organization so they become your vocabulary. Be sure to include words that describe both intention and words that address impact or results. We all bring history and perspective with us. Digging deep into personal, organizational, and system-wide history is necessary to recognize what we bring with us to work every day, where others are coming from, and our role within organizations and the role our organizations have played in the past. For example, the environmental movement has overwhelmingly been led and staffed by white people. As a result, we think of the environment as a beautiful place to preserve or a place to go on vacation. We don't so much think of it as the water that comes from our taps, the air we breathe, and the food we eat, which hit people of color harder than white people. We have marginalized people of color out of the movement and therefore focused on a narrow scope of what needs to be done through a narrow lens. I encourage each organization to consider hiring a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant to help you through this journey. Please reach out to me after the session for a list of recommended DEI consultants that I would gladly share with you. Also, consider having your staff take the relevant and free Harvard Implicit Bias tests for awareness and self-reflection. There are a lot of great tests that are available through them. Now that you've looked internally on basic equity issues, it's time to look externally. Consider and adopt rules for how you engage community members. The HEMAS principles of democratic organizing are just one example of rules that can be established. They're geared towards community organizing, but several of the rules apply universally. It's a good starting point for internal discussion to develop your own approach. If your decision-making happens behind closed doors, then not everyone has access to influence them. Therefore, the boss's favorites, like those who are similar to the boss or those who have been around for a long time, will have the most influence over decision. A great example of this is locker rooms. Sports reporters used to interview male athletes immediately after games by walking into the locker rooms. Women weren't permitted in, so they had great difficulty getting stories, getting promoted, or even getting the job. As a result, they weren't considered the right material to be sports reporters. Now apply that decision-making to your organization. It's important to make clear how and when decisions will be made, along with how staff can participate. That will increase participation by a more diverse group of staff, along with increased access to those historically cut out of decision-making. Be sure to actually apply the criteria when it's time to make decisions as well. Again, these concepts shouldn't sit on a shelf. Number 6 is squash gossip. You may assume that staff leave their jobs for better pay or benefits, but primarily staff leave because they feel unappreciated. A bad work environment is a killer for employee retention. If you want people to feel welcome and valued, then you must take serious toxic behavior. It will alienate vulnerable employees and top performers, which can be one and the same. Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice are all values. There are hundreds of ways to integrate them into your hiring process. Take time to think of ways that can make sense for your organization and decide to prioritize some of them. Do you want to require that a certain percentage of candidates are people of color before you start to interview? Do you want to ask each candidate about their personal commitment to equity? One great way to do this is to give context to questions. Tell candidates what you are looking for before you ask them to answer. That helps candidates really shine so you can figure out who is best to fill a position. For example, I recently helped someone hire a support position to do technical work. Before asking for their experience in a fast-paced campaign environment, we explained that we want someone who knows what it's like to be inside a campaign so they will know how to best be helpful. The answers we got to these questions were related to what we wanted to know instead of just poking around on a fishing expedition to figure out if they truly get what it's like. Number 8 is use a rubric. A hiring rubric is a chart that details what you're looking for in a new hire. This is one of the easiest and most impactful ways to improve your recruitment and hiring processes to support your diversity, equity, inclusion values and goals. A rubric lists the experiences, certifications, abilities, and other attributes that you must have, that you want to have, and that you would like to have in your new hire. Creating this guide will help you crystallize what is important to prioritize in your interviews, will shape your interview questions, and help you avoid hiring people who are similar to you just because you like them. Interviewers will catalog how each candidate fulfills these criteria and give them a score. Use the score to assess how well each candidate fulfills your hiring criteria. Also, create a hiring committee of people to interview the candidate. The hiring committee should consist of people from different backgrounds, management levels, and roles. After each interview, or after all interviews are completed, gather the hiring committee to review the candidate's qualifications and compare scores before deciding next steps for each candidate. Organizational fit is a particularly nebulous term that can be code for one of us. Avoid criteria that are merely gut instinct and get specific on what those values are. Some ideas include detail-oriented, hardworking, direct communicator, and compassionate. State and federal law often lag behind truly equitable practices. Decide your boundaries for protecting against harassment and discrimination. Using guides from advocacy organizations such as Human Rights Campaign are a good tool that you may find. Number 11, keep confidential. Job applications are personnel files and should be treated as such. Job seekers put themselves in a vulnerable position by applying for a job. If their current employer finds out, they could appear disloyal or get passed over for a promotion or other opportunities. Plus, it reflects poorly on you. Employers used to require a college degree just to demonstrate that someone is an educated professional. College degrees are very expensive to earn and not accessible to all qualified job candidates. When used as a hard line by hiring managers, excellent candidates may be unnecessarily weeded out. Also, women are less likely than men to apply for a job where they don't meet the stated qualifications. Only list required qualifications when truly necessary, such as an accounting degree or bar membership. Alternatively, you can list your preferred qualifications and allow for equivalent work experience. Number 13, clarify hiring. Many organizations have diversity in staffing within entry-level positions, but not within leadership. Assess this within your own organization. Use this information for setting goals for internal and external hiring. Lay out the path for entry-level staff to get promoted within your organization and create individualized plans to help staff achieve their career goals. Not only will it help you retain your staff overall, but you will create a path for promotion and prepare staff to take on more senior positions. Make clear the application process for internal hiring, such as send a resume and cover letter to the hiring manager 1 week before the job is posted publicly. Give all internal candidates an interview using your hiring rubric. Creating salary bands. The more clarity you can provide in compensation, the better. This will both minimize the possibility of disparate treatment of employees based on race, ethnicity, gender, or other irrelevant criteria, but also shows staff their potential path to increased compensation. It's becoming the expected practice to post the salary range for jobs when they are advertised. This ensures that candidates are not wasting their time applying for positions they would never accept. This is great for employers too, as they will save time weeding through resumes and interviewing candidates who don't want to work there. On the flip side, if the job pays well or more than expected, it's a great way to attract strong candidates. Please note that the salary range will be seen by employees, so it helps hold leaders accountable to internal pay equity between new hires and current employees. Recruiting top talent is hard. Keeping them is even harder. Be clear about decision-making authority and other important issues within positions. Using a job role charter model for positions or a RACI chart or similar model for projects will help define who does what in ways that a job description just can't. You can eliminate so much confusion by spelling out who gets to weigh in, who will lead, and who will have shared responsibility for a variety of areas. It also calls out what is important to measure. Job role charters are awesome. I think every organization should have them for each employee. If the model that you find is simplistic, then you'll need to dig deeper to define what they mean to your organization or project. Just giving a label of approver doesn't tell you much unless you specify what that means. Number 17, create criteria. Support good performance and avoid ambiguous gut instinct by defining what is expected within jobs and roles. Focus on items within the job description, annual goals, RACI job charter, and organizational values. This will help staff know how to succeed and help management avoid the pitfalls of unfairly disciplining people based on vague and undefined expectations. Be careful about what constitutes a violation of expectations and what steps will be taken if a violation occurs. Thinking through these expectations is yet another opportunity for employee engagement. Strong performers want to have a level playing field to support their work and resolve internal problems that can affect them, such as improving or removing chronically weak performers on the team. Getting input for staff evaluations. Staff evaluation should take into account more than just one person's opinion. Managers should write employee evaluations for their direct reports, but that report should take into consideration feedback from others. The board of directors should give staff the opportunity to share feedback about the executive director or CEO's performance within the review committee. That's an important way to hold the executive director accountable and elevate their performance. The staff supervisor should write the evaluation, and at least one other person should review it for concerns before it's shared with the employee. The same holds true for executive director evaluations. If it's just a single person writing the review, they should have another board member read it and provide feedback. Reviewers should watch out for comments about cultural backgrounds like hairstyles or clothing styles and focus on items within the job description, annual goals, race-year job charter, and organizational values. Number 20, be generous. Moving into compensation now, small employers and nonprofit organizations typically have limited budgets and want to squeeze every bit of value from their dollars. Remember that employees tend to stick around where they feel valued. Being generous with benefits is not only a way to make employees feel valued, but also can be less expensive than you think. Giving generous paid time off packages will attract good candidates, retain current employees, and boost job performance because your staff are less likely to be burned out and sick. Also consider increasing other benefits. Ask your insurance broker if they know of any low-cost benefits that you could add into your plan. Don't have an insurance broker? Then I encourage you to get one that supports organizations of your size. This support person is paid by the insurance company and is free for you to use. They support the organization and the staff, saving time for you and increasing employee support. Organizations can put all of their paid time off into one pool or bucket, or they can split it out by type. Some think it's better to put it all together so staff have flexibility to use their paid time off how they need. I highly encourage you to separate paid time off into different buckets. If you have sick and vacation time mixed together, then staff are going to wonder if it's worth using time off when they don't feel well instead of keeping that for vacation time. They might come to work sick. They might work near other staff or clients. They make others sick. Their performance might be compromised while they're under the weather, and they might stay sick longer because they didn't rest. Now imagine you're a single parent or you have older family members that you help support. These responsibilities are most likely to fall upon women and people of color. If you're in that situation, you're working hard for your employer, coming home to support your family, you're in need of a break, but you're burning through your PTO caring for family members. Carving out separate vacation time that is just for resting, relaxing, and recharging batteries is good for equity and good for staff retention. Finally, this is a potential cost savings to the organization. If you have combined paid time off banks, then when staff leave, they're probably getting paid out on all of it instead of just vacation. If you separate the vacation, then you will only have to pay out that bucket of unused time unless you specify otherwise in your policies. Number 22, encourage vacation. Staff who are burned out are unhappy, underperforming, and have shorter retention. Encourage staff to use their time off to their advantage. Everyone will be happier. Number 23, lend vacation. Allowing staff to borrow vacation is a free benefit that you can provide to your staff. This is especially beneficial to newer or junior staff. If someone leaves staff with a negative vacation balance, then the time owed is deducted from their final pay. There's no cost to the organization. Tune out. Please let staff take a break when they are off work. Set quiet hours for email where staff won't send messages, such as 7 p.m. to 8 a.m. is a practice that some employers are using. When staff are using paid time off, then don't require them to check messages and don't contact them. If you're worried that situations might arise that need their attention while they're gone, then have them create a vacation plan or an emergency absence plan detailing who to call or what to do in certain situations. Managers need to set a good example and follow this advice. This is probably the hardest part. If managers break the rule, then employees will feel obligated to follow suit, to look good, and to get ahead. Number 25, honor history. People in the dominant culture overwhelmingly take for granted their position in society. Taking note of intercultural or victory holidays is a way to practice awareness and acknowledge history and its impact on people ranging from different backgrounds. This summer, Congress approved making Juneteenth a national holiday. You can honor this decision by including it in your list of paid holidays. If you don't feel you can add another paid holiday, then consider replacing Columbus Day or another holiday with this one. Give parental leave. Benefits should be extended to all parents, including those who give birth, whose partners give birth, or those who adopt. You might consider including foster parents in this benefit as well. Parents need sufficient time for recovery, intensive childcare, and bonding. It's not uncommon for birthing parents to need 8 weeks to physically recover from the birth itself. Employers should allow new parents to take off at least 8 weeks and ideally 12. Ideally, employers can gift new parents with some or all of the time off for parental leave as paid. In addition to accessing sick and vacation time, small organizations could give 2 weeks off, and larger organizations could fill the sick and vacation time gap so parents can take off their entire leave with pay. Not only will this help younger people who are typically less generously compensated, it helps people without the financial support that accumulated wealth provides. Number 28, offer part-time. Having a new baby at home is really hard, and those with fewer resources may have an especially tough time. You can ease this transition and retain staff by allowing them to ease back into work or to continue part-time. Insurance benefits are typically decided by upper management who may be in a different phase of life than junior staff. Take the opportunity to engage staff before open enrollment to learn what insurance plan they would most like. It may be that lower cost, lower benefit plan would be helpful when staff share the premiums or when staff want to enroll spouses at their own cost. It may be that some staff have never had good insurance benefits before and want a comprehensive plan so they can address accumulated issues. I work with someone who never had dental insurance and ended up getting a ton of dental work done over 2 to 3 years with their new benefit. Offer FSAs, number 30. This is one of my favorite benefits because it is low cost and high reward. A flexible spending account, which is different than a HSA, allows staff to set aside pre-tax money from each paycheck for health-related costs like copays, prescriptions, glasses, and braces. The limit on these plans is nearly $3,000. A dependent care account allows staff to set aside pre-tax money from each paycheck for childcare needs. The limit on these plans is over $5,000. So you can imagine the tax benefit on diverting $8,000. The fees to the employer are just a few dollars a month per enrolled employee, plus typically a nominal startup fee of like $500. 31, open up dress codes. Employers want their staff to represent the organization well. Dress codes can impose outdated notions of gender and culture. If you need a dress code, then make it gender and culture neutral, such as stating that hair must be neatly groomed, rather than men must keep hair short. Respect the universe of family structures and genders by using words that describe the role instead of who is filling it. Pay attention to binary language that's either or, such as men and women, and replace it with a neutral term that includes all people. Use they instead of she, he. Avoid terms that assume gender of the person, such as mom. Number 33, reimburse incidentals. Lower paid staff have less power at work and are more impacted by covering their work costs than higher paid staff, so they might not feel comfortable speaking up about this. Think about the everyday costs that staff are paying on their own. Are they working from home and having to pay for their own internet? Are they using their own phone and having to pay for increased data usage? Are they using their own computer and having to pay for virus protection, repairs, or tech support? These are all work costs that should be covered by the organization. Develop policies and encourage staff to seek reimbursement for expenses or provide a general monthly non-taxable stipend for incidentals that doesn't require receipts. The federal mileage reimbursement rate changes every year to keep up with the cost of driving a car. Currently, it's 56 cents per mile this year and can be found on the IRS website. Oddly, it actually went down this year. They typically issue a new rate in mid to late December each year, and the rate includes the cost for gas, wear and tear, and insurance for your vehicle. Some organizations might find it more cost-effective to rent cars for longer trips than to reimburse staff for miles driven. Not everyone has access to a car, so include requirements like this in job postings rather than assume people can bring this resource to work. Number 36, disclose hours. Caregivers may have morning, night, and weekend responsibilities that make working an irregular schedule or long hours difficult or even impossible. Disclose the expectation in job postings. Explicitly tell candidates the after-hours expectations and confirm that this would work for them. Or avoid having meetings during those times if possible. As a parent with kids in school, the breakfast professional networking meeting is really challenging for me to attend, and being invited to events at that time makes me feel unseen. 37, respect lodging. Organizations want to save on overnight lodging, which makes sense. Give staff an opportunity to request single occupancy rooms to protect privacy by saying that double occupancy is encouraged but not required. Social norms differ between cultural groups and among people with different neurological types. When concerns are raised about social differences, evaluate if the difference matters. Then consider the reason why you or the observer has the concern. Is there a legitimate worry, or is the person simply expressing themselves differently than you do? Maybe making eye contact is uncomfortable or inappropriate for them. Maybe they aren't shaking your hand because of a health concern. Start from a place of empathy and try to put yourself in their shoes before making a judgment, and assume best intentions until someone shows you otherwise. When guiding staff on workplace safety, give criteria for engaging authorities. 911 should be called where there is an active safety risk, such as a person with a weapon. Police should be called when a crime has occurred and it needs to be reported. Otherwise, staff should consider if implicit bias is influencing them when raising a concern. They should be encouraged to de-escalate or learn more if that's an option. For example, if someone sees a person lurking around the property looking suspicious, then does that warrant calling authorities, or is another response more appropriate? Number 40, selectively check backgrounds. Background checks screen out potentially dangerous employees and can protect organizations and people. However, a criminal record alone should not be a barrier to employment. Determine what type of history matters to you. How old of a conviction is relevant? What types of convictions matter? Do you only care about violent crime and theft? Maybe you don't care about moving violations or minor drug offenses. Consider when in the application process is a good time to notify candidates of the background check. Typically, background check requirements are not included in job postings unless they're a major barrier, like working in a school. You may want to include it in your list of next steps when preparing to invite someone for a second interview. Then you can give some context. Also consider what level of probing is appropriate and necessary. Credit history is unlikely to have bearing on an employee's suitability or performance. People most likely to get into financial trouble are those without a family safety net to step in. The cost of healthcare and education are frequently causes for poor credit or bankruptcy and not a reflection on character. Number 41, make space. Employees and guests may need private space during the day to take care of personal needs. Equip each office or meeting room with a lock and window shades to ensure that there are options for pumping, prayer, changing of clothes, and other needs. Number 42, equalized bathrooms. Single stall bathrooms should be gender neutral. This approach welcomes all and minimizes wait times when only one bathroom is occupied. Stocking menstrual supplies should be considered as a basic necessity, similar to stocking toilet paper. If guests with small children might use your bathrooms, then consider adding space for diaper changing in at least one of the bathrooms. If your bathrooms are gendered, then be sure to have a changing station in both bathrooms. 43, open doors. Consider the life cycle of physical abilities when looking at building design. There are simple and low or no cost decisions that can be made to accommodate a range of needs. Consider desk placement for maneuverability of aided walkers. Consider door handles instead of knobs for arthritic hands. Consider handrails with all stairs. This is yet another opportunity for staff involvement in your policies. You can create a small working group to review your office space and make recommendations on improvements. Since the committee is doing work that's unlikely to require mission expertise, this is a great opportunity for newer staff or support staff to take a leading role. Host meetings and events in spaces that are accessible to all. If that's not your office, then check out libraries, restaurants, and other organizations' offices. Providing building access information on your website can make it easy for visitors with mobility needs to plan, and then also give them a number to call with requests or questions. Plan for accessibility needs such as priority parking, valet parking, etc. at events, or even lobby chairs. And number 45, last but not least, avoid allergies. Ensure your office is safe from allergens. Ask staff if they have any life-threatening allergies. Prohibit these foods from entering the building and avoid ordering these foods when supplying catering. The same goes true for board members and other expected guests. This is hard work. Thank you for listening to these 45 tips. It takes thought, deep reflection, and conversation. Some of this is solo work and some of it is group work. If you're starting on your diversity, equity, and inclusion journey, I encourage you to hire a DEI consultant. Again, reach out if you're looking for a recommendation of a consultant that might be a good fit for you. I can also connect you with resources and other service providers that we've talked about through this session. Finally, please reach out if you would like a copy of the assessment tool that's a companion to this training. You will go through each of these items that I've described and rate them as either not included, included but need improvement, or is fully included. Then you'll get a score by section and an overall score to help guide you on improving the equity of your employee handbook.
I'm
Danielle, I
talking
think
and I'm muted. You would think at this stage of the game I would be beyond that, but apparently not. Thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. And we have a number of questions in the, and they're growing. A number of questions and even more being posted in the Q&A section. Before we jump into the questions in the Q&A box, I want to first address one that says, where do we get emails to access? Your contact information will be included in the slide deck that will be sent out after the forum. So if you're looking to get in contact with her, that's a great way to do that. But first I want to say that one of the things that was a takeaway for me is that a good chunk of these tips that you provided today was really about creating a concrete structure to operations when it comes to dealing with employees. I noticed that a lot of organizations do like to keep somewhat of a nebulous distance around how they treat their employees. They lack structure, leaning on somewhat of that organizational fit model as opposed to really laying out the expectations they have for a hire or for employees. And so I'm sure that some of our questions will get to that structure, but I just wanted to call that out, that sometimes folks like to run from structure, but really putting that format into play is how we build that equity in. So I love that piece of your presentation. So we have a couple of questions about resources, and folks are wondering if you have a job charter that you can share. I also noted that you had a couple of other resources that you'd mentioned in this forum, and so perhaps we can connect and maybe you'll be able to provide some of those as resources in the post-forum email. Does that work for you?
Sure. If folks reach out, then I can give them samples of a range of different things, can customize recommendations, and I can answer quick questions as well. I'm happy to respond to individuals. And charters is one of those examples that I think is a really great tool that folks could use.
Okay, let's see. So one of the questions that we got, I thought was really interesting, was around, there are organizations, particularly in human service orgs, that just have a lot of turnover as a nature of the business that they do. And so they're consistently in a need to try and find new employees. One of the concerns expressed in our Q&A section is how to do this quickly. How do we get from a job posting to equitable hire in a quick way, leaning on the fact that pulling together committees, et cetera, maybe take more time than we have.
I think that using the hiring rubric is one of the best things that you can do to transform your hiring. And it really gets you to think through your entire process from the beginning. It can get you to completely change your job description. It can change the questions that you're going to ask to candidates. It can change what your priority values are when you're looking to evaluate candidates as well. So I think that that's super important. I also think it's important to have at least 2 interviews with each person that you hire. Different things will come out, and make sure there are multiple people that are involved in the hiring process. Ideally, people from different backgrounds and experiences, whether that's management and non-management, people who are in a support role or a direct supervisor. Different combinations are going to see different angles on the need for the role and the qualities that candidates bring to the position.
That's a great answer. I also think, again, leaning on the structure, putting that into place is always the heaviest piece of the lift. So it might seem arduous the first couple of times it's done, but once the organization is able to establish a bit of muscle memory around pulling these kind of hiring practices together, it should move a lot faster, particularly if you're employing a rubric, to your point.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm somebody who likes to do a lot of planning, but then I also like to correct what I'm doing as I go along. And so I might have a pretty decent rubric the first time I go through it, but by the time I'm done with that, I actually have a really good one that I can use for the next application. And I've taken notes on those steps that I've gone through and can just kick it out next time and redo it without much effort.
That's excellent. So continuously improving the tools that you're using.
Hmm. Yeah.
Another question here. It is about whether to offer, and I apologize if I'm misunderstanding the question, but does it work to offer 8 hours of community service for a holiday like Juneteenth? In addition to, or as opposed to having the calendar day off? Is that something that would be of value to employees?
I think that these are great conversations to have within your organization. First off, like there should be communication between staff and their managers and not just making it a one-way street of deciding what's going to happen. I think staff like to have community building opportunities and to work together towards something, getting out into a park or some other type of activity that's different than what their regular day-to-day is. I wouldn't wipe out your holidays for that, but you could maybe have 1 or 2 events a year that you do like that.
To just add to that a bit, I think that part of the conversation around providing holidays is having those staff members who celebrate those holidays, giving them the opportunity to do that. So certainly not taking away the time to have a paid holiday, but giving the option or opportunities to also do that as community service. So for example, for Juneteenth, if my family were to celebrate that day, that may not be a day that I would choose to do community service, but some of my other colleagues might choose community service that day, and providing that option could be helpful.
Absolutely. Be careful not to provide a lot of peer pressure around it. Just like when managers don't use their vacation time, or if they're sick and they're still responding to all of their emails, then other staff expect that that's what they're going to need to do. And so if you're heavily pressured, or there's just a general understanding that you're expected to use your holiday in a particular way instead of having it as a day off, then that can create a dynamic that could be really negative.
Jody, can I ask you to share the last slide that you have with your email address? We have a number of questions on how to get the assessment tool, how to reach out to you, how to get contact. Just so everybody knows, that information will be in the slide deck that you will receive in an email form after this forum, in addition to a link to the this actual webinar. So you'll get all of that information. We've learned how to include the transcription, so that will be there as well. So keep an eye out for that email, and that should answer some of these questions as well.
Yep, it's Jody at bigchange.llc on the screen there, JODI at bigchange.llc.
Okay. And so we have a question on do you have any strategies on how to squash gossip, or what does it look like to nurture a supportive workplace environment?
That's a super challenging one and something that might take a lot of time. Um, I think it starts at the beginning of your employment with somebody, is to talk about what your values are. I would make sure that you're onboarding them and talking about values and that it's included in your employee handbook, that list of values, and utilizing those along the way. You can also have an organization-wide discussion about values and then live into those as well. And so if you're experiencing something that would be like a gossip problem, then that should be addressed right away. So the manager should have a discussion with the employee to say, here is what I understand happened, and here is the impact that it has on your colleagues in the organization. Can you please share with me what you were thinking? Is this accurate? And then discuss next steps and that this is not the kind of behavior, assuming that everything that they understood was accurate, that this is not the kind of behavior that's supportive of the work that we're trying to do. It doesn't help our mission and doesn't help have a good experience for the staff. And then if it comes up again, move through a little bit more of a progressive discipline process to say, look, this is a bigger problem, and you can increase those levels of conversation from there. You could also redirect in a conversation. If you hear things that are happening in a meeting that isn't really productive, you can redirect and say, well, I think we want to stay on topic, or I think that we want to make sure we're sticking to the facts, or we want to honor or respect the experience that different people have had. So we're going to set that aside, or some other comment like that, without adding to a charge and making people feel bad about something that they probably unintentionally said.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I just read an article not long ago about the prevalence of workplace bullying. It's something that you don't really hear a lot about, but that is something that happens to employees that may not may be going under the radar of the leadership. So making sure to nurture those environments where people can feel supported by, number one, modeling that in leadership and being attuned to the relationships of the staff. So those are definitely things to keep an eye out on.
Yeah, and as nonprofit folks, we are in it for the mission. And so we want to take one for the team. We want to work really hard. And we tend to also have a history of just sacrificing ourselves for the work. And so we will probably tolerate a little bit more uncomfortable situations at work than we should. And so one way to help reduce that bullying is to make sure that you're having input on staff reviews. And so when it's employee evaluation time, then ask employees to give feedback maybe through a survey, or to ask some number of colleagues to give some feedback about performance. And so it could just be, tell us about this employee's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities for improvement, something pretty simple, but it is an open channel of communication to help flesh out some things that might be going on that the supervisor might not see, because people will act differently among supervisors than they may among those who they think they have a little bit more influence or power over.
To answer one of the questions, I will feverishly Google to see if I can retrace my steps and find that workplace bullying article. And if I can find it before this email goes out, we will include it in the email. So we also have one that I think it's important to address. The question is, what if we refer to someone as he/she? Would that be fine?
I think that that's definitely better than referring in like a manual or something, saying he, right? It's more inclusive. I think you can get even broader and universally inclusive to use the term they, because these pronouns have been changing over time. And it used to be 10 years ago, you would just see he as a universal for people, and then it became he and she, and now they can include singular, plural, he, she, or those who use the gender neutral term they.
Definitely. They is always a better option to he/she, and it's not harder to incorporate. So certainly opt for they when you have the chance. All right, let's see. Should a paid, let's see, should an organization provide paid time off for employees who have some sort of court subpoena, jury duty, sort of kind of situation, so they don't have to use personal or vacation time?
It's ideal that you can do that. And organizations structure their paid time off in a lot of different ways, as we talked about a little bit earlier. You might want to include it in allowing staff to use it under the sick time bucket that you have. You might allow staff to use paid time off. Might allow them to take that time off paid for some number of days, but if they're in extended jury service, it might be a little different. There are actually a lot of state laws around this. In Ohio, I don't think that there are any requirements, but if there are folks from out of state or have a multi-state organization on the webinar here today, there may be some specific requirements. New York, New Jersey, California have some of the more stringent legal requirements around paid time off in employee practices. But I've never actually sat on a jury. I've been called a few times. It's not something that happens a lot. There's not a huge risk to an employer to allow their staff to take time, paid time for jury duty. So you could even say that you can have up to 2 weeks a year to use for jury duty. If it's extended, then you can't compensate for that. There's a lot of different ways you might want to think about structuring it.
Wonderful. We also have a question here around sharing pay bands, and should that include the salaries of leadership as well?
So the pay bands don't tell you the specific salary of an individual. They tell you the range of salaries that people in positions could have. And so you could have the top executive at your organization. It could be a range. It could say at least a certain amount as well without a top range. Typically, the CEO or executive director's salary is public information. It's on the tax returns. And so it's not a big secret anyway. But you don't need to disclose individual compensation for folks. Practices are changing where some organizations do have completely transparent salaries. It might be that each individual person's salary is transparent to the organization. It could be that each each person in a position pays the same amount. And there's a lot of, confidentiality that might be involved, and people are touchy about talking about finances and personal finances. So this is really an individual type decision for an organization, but I don't see any harm in having the range for salary positions to be public, especially since it really is expected for new open positions.
Okay, and we also have a question around mental health days. Should those be taken as PTO or sick time? Some organizations have even opted to have a separate bucket for mental health days. So what's your take?
I think, again, there's lots of ways to do it. I think that it could be used within your sick time, especially if it's a really stressful job or one that it's a really stressful time and situation. This work is very personal. People are really invested in it. If you're dealing with clients that have really difficult personal situations, it can be very emotionally affecting on a day-to-day basis, in addition to the overall content that you're working on. And so I think it's really nice to be able to include mental health time in with your sick time if you can.
Wonderful. So I think that I'm going to go back to the organizational fit for a second. A lot of organizations lean on this concept of fit, this nebulous concept of fit that is never quite well defined. It's something I think the organization feels that they just know, but may not commit to pen and paper. And I believe that they would say there's a reason for that. There's a reason for looking for that fit. Can you talk us through a little bit about how to hire an individual that has what this organization is looking for without it being so nebulous, without looking for a fit?
I think you could brainstorm with that organizational value idea, and you can even bring that down to the position level as well. So you could say with the team, what are the qualities that we want within our employees? And you can describe what it looks like when people have those qualities. So, for example, you could say, we want our employees to lead with empathy. An employee who leads with empathy will um, listen first before they speak. They will always, lend a hand, or what you can describe what that embodies. And then when you get down into the position in particular, you would want, let's say, your administrative staff to be detail oriented. You want them to be customer service oriented. You want them to be prompt. And so specifically saying what those qualities are in advance of beginning your interviews can really help clarify what does fit mean, because those are things about organizational fit. They're just better defined. They're not, you're not just leaving it loose for a gut instinct, which is what happens if you don't really specify what that means.
So that's really getting back to that lead-in work of setting up a framework around how you intend to hire and lead in your HR practices. Can you talk a little bit about that initial setup for an organization? We know that we have orgs on this call and throughout Central Ohio that have varying sizes, numbers of employees, levels of busyness, et cetera. And I know some of our orgs probably feel very strapped for time. And so the thought of having to set up a framework for this might seem exacting. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, for HR, there are some legal things you need to do, and then there are some like personnel related things that you want to do. The most important thing is you want to recruit and retain top talent while fulfilling all your legal obligations. And so think about what are the kinds of folks that you want in your organization, what are those backgrounds that you want, what are the qualities that you want, and then think about how to attract those folks. But even more important than that is you need to retain them. And so having high staff turnover is really difficult for an organization. A lot of this work is relationship based. And so if you are supporting a client base, you have to really understand them. If you are reaching out and doing any type of organizing or advocacy, you have to know who those folks are and they have to know and trust you as well. And so you want to keep good staff around as long as you can, and you want to have a diversity of staff as well. You want staff to be able to move up through different positions so that you're having folks in leadership who understand the work of the organization, and it gives staff the ability to stick with you a little bit longer term. Fundraising staff in the United States have an average tenure of 16 months, and that is the epitome of how you don't want to do it. And so fundraising staff will change organizations to get promoted or to make more money, or because they feel like there's not a good understanding of what they need to do or how the work needs to be supported. And so really understanding what the staff needs through a good dialogue is super important. Make sure that there are paths for two-way communication. It's not just manager giving feedback to employee, but schedule time as part of check-in meetings to ask for feedback. What can we do to support you? What do you need over the next 6 months? What did you think about the staff meeting? Any suggestions for improvement? How was your onboarding? What do you think we can do to recruit, top talent into the organization? We're looking to bring in people with these skills or experiences. What ideas do you have? And so coupling that type of two-way conversation with making sure you're checking the boxes to complete any legal requirements that you have, I think is really the most important thing. You can create structures that make sense for you. Just be thoughtful about it and be consistent. If you treat one person in a certain way, think about how that applies to all people.
Wonderful. And when you start having these conversations, to me, this feels like the lift of establishing maybe a new strategic plan, a new way that we're going to engage with hiring and employee management. What conversations should be happening at various levels of the organization? So what should the board be talking about versus leadership versus management, et cetera?
That's a really good question. The board's role is to govern the overall organization. They supervise the executive director, they don't supervise the rest of the staff. So they should be making sure that there is a good job description, good communication, a good evaluation system with the executive director. They should support the executive director and be a partner in their work to supervise the staff. So there's definitely a limited role and focus there. Board members can be great volunteers, they can be experts, they can be cheerleaders, they can be really helpful, but they don't supervise the individual staff besides the executive director. And then the executive director is the person who's kind of in the middle between the board and between the rest of the staff that is setting the tone for the organization. They're setting priorities for the organization within the strategic plan, and they run the day-to-day of the organization. So the staff are really looking to the executive director or CEO for guidance on how things should be done, how quickly things should be done, um, and what quality the work should be done at. And so the executive director ideally is weighing in on important decisions and allowing staff to kind of flourish as they are making their day-to-day decisions. Depending on the number of levels of staff supervision, it could be the executive director is making every single hiring decision. In a larger organization, it could be a manager that's making that decision, and the executive director may have little or some relationship to or participation in that. Very often in nonprofits, because we're relatively small, compensation tends to be set at a central level. It's really hard with an organization of 5 people or even 50 people to allow individual managers to set salaries and compensation for people within their team because there may be different kinds of philosophies across the organization. So that very often is handled by an HR person. If an organization has one, executive director, COO type person, so that it is across the organization. And then folks at each level of the organization should be involved in interviewing. Probably you want folks who have been at the organization going on a year before they're participating in interviews, but people in a wide range of positions can participate, and it is an opportunity to offer leadership to folks who may not be in a leadership position. They're weighing in on a small committee, they're helping to select the next staff, they're giving feedback to managers about what may be valuable criteria and where there might be gaps in the organization or qualities that can enhance the work of the group or can help support different skill sets that staff have.
Wonderful. And we have another question around, I'm going to maybe make some assumptions, but how do you deal with individual employee needs? So for their example, it was an employee who had a specific religious function that they needed to attend that intersects with a very important organizational deliverable. How do you make sure that you're being respectful to your employees while also following through on organization commitments?
So being clear about expectations is really important up front. So we talked about some of the things that could be included in job postings, like night and weekend requirement, hours required, or must have your own vehicle. So that helps to make sure that staff have a lot of notice and also creates a culture where there is advance notice when possible. It's easier to work around hiccups when you have things are generally running more smoothly. So that's kind of the first thing. I would say that, if you're looking at how to balance out individual needs, then try to make your policy supportive and flexible, but still working for the organization. So for religious holidays, different ways groups might handle that is to allow staff to take maybe up to 2 days off per year for religious purposes that they request in advance. And I've worked at organizations where you've had people from a wide range of religions take advantage of those. You could allow so-called floating holidays. You could allow personal days that could be used for that purpose. If there's a conflict with the work that needs to get done, then think about, can it be done in advance? Is there somebody else that can support it? Or is this a case where really this employee is the only person who can take care of it, and then have conversations from there?
All right, so we have another question that says, do you have any recommendations on engaging staff to identify potential bias and discriminatory practices? And then the person goes on to say, I feel like water cooler talk can come from the oversight of issues like these. What are potential questions or formats to collect this feedback?
So I think this is where you would want to bring in a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert, which is not me. There are a lot of consultants who have great experience and knowledge and are very skilled facilitators, organizational change management leaders, and who have both professional and lived experience that addresses how these issues come together. So I would encourage organizations to take a look at an assessment or bringing in somebody for a larger project to help them along those ways. I think the Harvard Implicit Bias Test is a good kind of self reflection tool. It's free. You can Google search for it. They have a bunch of different tests. I think there's a race test. Um, there is probably a gender test, ethnicity test. And what they do is it's kind of a time test where you're given words and images and you're asked to associate the pairs of them together. And then they're reversed. And so you can see through literal mathematical type of testing where your own biases lie because the speed will change. And so I encourage organizations to encourage the staff to do it. I don't think that they should share those results, but it can be illuminating for the individual to kind of think about their own biases, of which we all have, and need to, think about how it plays into our experiences at work.
All right, and one more thing I wanted to ask you just before we wrap up today. You mentioned, so we've talked a lot about policies and a lot about structures and how to make things very official, but there are situations in organizations where there are unspoken norms, and the thing that comes to mind is what you mentioned about the networking breakfast that happens during, morning school drop off time, or
Uh-huh.
for me, it's always the happy hours that happen during, pickup time from schools, or things that might conflict. And so there's no necessary stated requirement that folks must attend, but there is an unspoken expectation. How do we navigate setting or unsetting expectations in our workplace?
This might be a good opportunity to do an internal staff survey. So if you're doing some practices that are, you can have different themes of surveys too. And so you might want to ask, what are good meeting, if we have to meet outside of 9 to 5, or we want to do a social event, what would you prefer? Would you like to have a happy hour? Would you like to have a lunch picnic during the workday? Do you want to have like a family event on the weekend? And let the staff weigh in and let them decide really what works for them. And it's good to have both like a rating scale where people can say, you know, answer in a way that is very clear, yes, no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but also leave room for comments as well so you can get feedback in case something's not going to work for folks.
All right, thank you so much for this information. We've already gotten lots of feedback in the chat box that this has been valuable. Jody, you have been so kind to say that you welcome folks reaching out to you for additional questions around this topic. I know that you both, somebody just highlighted something that I don't want to leave without saying. Happy hours are very difficult for people who are in recovery. So being mindful about the types of activities that we host is really important as well. Thank you for that call out. Also, feel free to reach out to Jody with additional questions. I know that many of you had questions around how to access certain tools. Jody has those resources, so she'd be a great person to reach out for those tools additionally. We will provide as many resources as we can in our our post-forum email, so keep an eye in your inbox for that. And also do take some time out to fill out the survey and help us know exactly what kinds of content to bring to you through the nonprofit forums. That would be very helpful. I want you to also keep an eye out for our next up forum that we have. It's called How to Run Efficient, Effective, and Empowering Meetings. Dr. Bria Heidelberg will be bringing that content to us. It's important conversation around how to make sure you get the most out of your meetings, but also how to make sure you get the most out of power sharing in those meetings so that your most quiet employees are also heard. Everyone has a voice. That is on September 15th from 10 a.m. to 11:15. So make sure to keep an eye out for the RSVP, and thank you for joining us today. Take care.